for anyone who may not have been able to read the slide. You've entered the webinar on mute and off camera until the end of the webinar. Please ask all questions in the Q&A box. If you're having technical difficulties, please use the chat box or email me at mdiaz@enviroissues.com. This webinar is being recorded. All right, so we'd like to kick off this webinar with a quick poll. So I'll launch the poll in a few minutes. Please answer these questions honestly and to the best of your knowledge. There are no right or wrong answers. We're doing this poll so we can learn a little bit more about our audience tonight. So I'll give folks a couple minutes here to go ahead and answer the questions in the poll. All right, give folks just a couple more seconds to finish up. And then I'll go ahead and share our results. Don't worry, your results are anonymous. All right, so I've closed the poll and I'll go ahead and share the results. So how often are folks watering their lawn? Looks like we have about 0 times per week being the most popular answer. like some folks are using some slow release fertilizer or none. More are using none. And looks like folks are currently not leaving grass clippings on their lawn. And looks like more folks do not overseed their lawn. And not a lot of folks are aerating their lawns either. All right. Thank you everyone for participating. Now I'll hand it over to Laura Mauder from South Alliance. Laura?
I'm here. So, Marisol, do you want to put my slides up for me?
Yes.
So thanks you guys for coming. We're going to be talking about lawn care tonight, how to take care of your lawn naturally in the Pacific Northwest. This is easy to do. Lawns like to grow here because we have a lot of cool weather, and grass is a cool weather crop. So we're going to go through all the basics about lawn care and why it matters to maintain your lawns naturally, what difference does that make to the environment, and then also some basics about if you want to do alternatives. There'll be a little bit of information about alternative lawns at the very end. So I work with Tilth Alliance. We are a nonprofit that specializes in education around organic and regenerative agriculture and gardening practices in the Northwest. We work with farmers across Washington State. We work with backyard gardeners and small farmers and urban farmers on the west side here in Washington. And we have a program called the Garden Hotline, which I manage, which is free for you to call if you have questions. So beyond this webinar, that resource is there for you as well to ask more questions of. Next. So these are the topics we're going to go over. Some of them expand out into a lot more information, like lawn maintenance is where the bulk of the slides will be. But we're going to talk a little bit first about soils and amendments and what the native soils that you're starting with look like, what the climate in the Pacific Northwest is about, lawn maintenance, which is all the care of lawns, lawns and stormwater management, lawn renovation, special site considerations, AKA where you might not want to have a lawn. And then if you want to remove a lawn or reduce it, how do you do that? So next. So soil is the basis of all healthy plants. And I include lawns in that because lawns are plants. We think of lawns as things we walk across. Many people don't think of it as a living entity like they would the tree that they planted in their yard, but it's all the same. They all have the same needs and they all need to be attended to. And soil is the key to keeping everything healthy. So healthy soil will reduce your need for chemical fertilizers and pesticides. And that's really a lot of what we'll be talking about tonight because we don't want these chemicals and pesticides. Fertilizers have also chemicals in them that get into groundwater and pollute and also cause algal blooms that reduce oxygen and then starve the fish out. And so we don't want to be using and overusing things that will cause that to happen. Healthy soil can also reduce how much you need to water your lawn. So it'll reduce your irrigation needs. It filters out urban pollutants like what you see in the slide on the top where, you know, cars leaking. If you have grassy areas, for instance, you know, there's the advice to, if you're going to wash your car, to wash it up on a grassy turf area because the soil underneath it will help to hold the pollutants that come off the car when you're washing it. Healthy soil can sequester stormwater, and then it also stores carbon from the atmosphere. And when you have healthy soil, you're going to also have deeper root system. This is important for lawns. People don't think about lawns as, you know, being deep-rooted plants, but grasses can have deep roots and they need to have good deep soil in order to be able to sustain all the stress that can happen to them as they grow. Next. So soil, what is soil made of? It is the dirt And Marisol, you can do 2 nexts here to get to the little pop-ups. So it's about half mineral, half pore space, and a small amount of organic matter and soil life. So the organic matter is what feeds the soil life, which is also something like a worm, but can also be a microorganism. And that breakdown of matter is what's actually feeding your plants. So when we talk about fertilizers, we'll talk about that a little bit, because we're feeding the soil when we feed our plants. And that is a key component of keeping your soil healthy and keeping your plants healthy. Soil is composed of mineral particles that could be sandy, silty, or clayey. And they have different pore sizes, different sizes of particles that create different pore sizes in the soil. And so if you have a sandy soil, you're going to have bigger pore sizes, more water that moves through, which means it's going to dry out faster. If you have clay soil, it's going to be tighter bound and water won't move through it as readily. Then silty soil also has small particles that can also hold water. So a good mix of this is what we want. We're looking for loam, which is a mix of all these types of mineral particles combined with organic matter. And generally soil, true soil, is formed over time by nature. And the soil that we work with in garden spaces often is manufactured. So next. This is an example of some of the soil life that you might find in any given soil sample. The Northwest, our soils are fungal dominant, and a lot of fungi actually attach to roots of plants. They could actually pierce the root of a plant or just wrap around it, and they have exchange of nutrients because these organisms cannot photosynthesize. And what you see above soil that lets you know that funguses are prevalent or in the soil are the mushrooms, that we see growing above ground. But underneath the soil, there's all these networks that combine and attach to plant roots and can help feed back in materials that are breaking down in the soil to the plants themselves. So next. In the Northwest, our soils are pretty glacial, especially in the Snoqualmie area. Of course, there were both continental glaciers that advanced and retreated over time several times. When continental glaciers advance, alpine glaciers can follow suit. And so we still have alpine glaciers that unfortunately, many of those are retreating at this point in time, but they have an effect on the soil, especially the continental glaciers, because they brought materials from other places and just sort of left them behind. So a lot of the way our soil gets composed is by all the mineral content that came from all those rocks that came out of the glaciers. There's also transition areas where the glaciers stopped, where there's a lot of silty and clay soil. So you have rocky soils, you have silt soils, clay soils. You also have meltwater channels that are unique features where water bodies build up. And that's kind of how our geology got built up. Soil profiles are, of course, diversified in the Snoqualmie area. You have more, like on Snoqualmie Ridge, you would have more mountain soils, and in the valleys, you can be around the river. You may have more river valley soils. So there's diversity, as there is anywhere. The Snoqualmie area isn't particularly different from other parts of Washington State, except that you are more mountainous. So this kind of soil profile can be challenging to work with. And we'll talk a little bit about how we fix soil. So next. Also, what's going on when you have humans in an area is that we are building, and we're building housing areas. And so a lot of times when a housing area is built, and there are now mechanisms in place to prevent some of this from happening anymore, but it was a common practice to remove all the topsoil from an area. And then you have machinery working across the area as you're clearing forest or clearing an area and building new homes. You're compacting the soil at the same time, and you're down to the subsoil. And sometimes that kind of soil is also used to fill. and it's not good topsoil. So topsoil is where you have your organic matter and where soil can be healthy for plant life. When you get down into subsoil, you don't have as much nutrient there, and you don't have any of the biota to help with that. This also can introduce toxins into your soils when you have equipment running across, and gasoline, oil, different things are happening, chemicals that are used in building. So there are mechanisms in place, especially to protect soil, to make sure that good topsoil is brought back in after it's removed, or else it's preserved and then replaced. Next. Manufactured soils, when we purchase them, aren't soils in the same sense that native soils are, because they weren't built over time. And they are, a combination, a recipe, so to speak, of what we put together to create a medium that plants can grow in. The inputs could be sourced from variable sources. They're not always consistent. They can sometimes come from construction sites. Some of them have certified organic components, but we wouldn't call these native soils. So when you're purchasing soil, you can ask questions from your supplier about if anything's been tested, if the compost that's in it is organic. You can ask questions about where the mineral content comes from, all those kinds of things. And they should be able to give you those answers so that you can know you're buying a reliable product. But basically, you're looking for something that's going to mimic our native soils, which has mineral content, organic matter. And then as you start to use it, you will reinfuse with soil life, and it needs to have good air space for air and water. Next. So soil testing also can come in handy when you are building on a site that might have had some past history that could have had toxic exposures. This could include houses that were built pre-1978, when there might have been lead paint in the side, in the paint on the house. Orchards used to have things like arsenic used on the trees as pesticide, and that's persistent in the ground. It's metal. Old industrial sites, auto shops could have leaded paint. Old substations could have pesticides and PCBs. Cement plants have a lot of polluting components that blow through the wind and deposit on the ground. Highways, the same. And then also in our area, we have the Hazardous smelter plume, which shouldn't affect Snoqualmie very much, but has affected areas along Puget Sound from Tacoma all the way up through, even up into parts of Ballard and Seattle, mostly in southwest King County. But soil testing is good to give you also just a soil health baseline to know what kind of soil you're dealing with, what's in it, how much organic matter you have, what the acid or alkaline content of the soil is, whether it's high pH or not. Lawns tend to like a more neutral to high pH. And so we have acidic soils naturally in the Northwest. So it's good just to get baselines to know what you need to apply to your lawn. Next. So there are ways to amend the soil, and you can do this. It shows this picture of cover crop in the left there. And you can do that even, oops, where did our slide go? There we go. So on the picture on the left, you can do that even in a lawn area. Say you want to convert an area or redo a lawn. This is one thing you can do to improve your soil if you want to, is just go cover crop on it for the fall and put your lawn in the spring. And then you could till all that in, and that's going to improve the structure of your soil. It's going to add nitrogen to the soil. It's typically used in vegetable gardening, but this is just a soil improvement technique. But compost is always a great addition. It's good if you have sandy soil to help with the pore spaces to keep it from drying out. It's good with clay soil to help break it up and make more pore spaces in the soil. So next. So this is a map showing different weather stations in Washington. WSU has, it's called Ag Weather Net. And you can go to that site and find the closest weather station to your area and look at and see, what the air temperature is, how the wind is moving, what the dew point is. the humidity, soil temperature, all those different things. And that can give you some information to know, is this a good time to be trying to put new grass in? Is this a good time to overseed my lawn? Generally, we have guidelines, which we'll be giving you tonight, about when to do that, but you can also use this to help time what you're doing. Also, soil temperature is important if you are a vegetable gardener in particular, because it can let you know when the soils are warm enough to put those hot weather crops out, just so you know. So next slide. And then in Snoqualmie, the cumulative rainfall can be 80 inches a year annually, so that's a lot. Your hottest months, I'm down in Seattle and Delridge, so we're not that much different. I think we have a little bit less cumulative rain in Seattle than we do up in the mountains. July, August, September are our hottest months. Lowest rainfall, July and August. That's pretty much the same here. We stretch into September a lot. This June rain and cloudy days that precede summer are super important for the Northwest. They're great for your lawn because lawn is a cool weather crop, and you need to really get it growing well and developed well through the spring. And that June rain helps to take us into the summer months when we get so dry, like in July and August. So as we have more climate change effects, we see more impact, especially on trees, for that lack of June rain and cloudiness that we used to have pretty typically. April and then September and October are optimum for growing grass. Grass loves cooler season weathers. So next. So lawns and stormwater. So lawns can be a permeable surface if they are grown correctly. And so that's important to know if you have anything coming off your roof that's running through your lawn, if you have cars parked in driveways and water runs across the lawn, they can be great areas to absorb and hold pollutants from getting into local waterways. But then also how we treat our lawn matters, because if you're fertilizing, if you're using any kind of pesticide, which could include insecticides, fungicides, and herbicides. Herbicides are used on lawns. That's probably the highest use of herbicides that we see for plants, and they are used all the time, and all of that has potential to get into the groundwater around your home. Most of the chemical application or chemical pollution that we see comes from more from homes than it does from industry in most areas. So maintaining a healthy lawn can prevent that runoff. And the Snoqualmie River itself has a drainage basin of over 693 square miles. So you're protecting a lot of territory for the water coming through the Snoqualmie River that connects up to the Snohomish River and then goes out into the Sound eventually. Next. So 23 pesticides have been detected in our local waterways. A lot of these, as I said, come from urban areas and not agricultural land. Many of them, if you were to talk about the Duwamish River, of course, that's big industry pollutants in there, but also any houses that are in the watershed area can contribute to that. Driving our cars, car pollutions are another big source. So a lot of these are identified as lawn chemicals. And of course, this guy is actually spraying around the tree, but you can imagine him spraying on the lawn. We spray lawns for weeds predominantly. We apply weed and feeds, which are fertilizer and chemicals mixed, pesticides mixed to kill the weeds. And we spray if we think we have pests on the lawn. And then we add chemical fertilizers to the lawn. So it's a heavy source of pollution that can get into waterways. Next. So the problem with all of this is that it leads downstream and it will affect our fish, which also then affect our orca populations because they eat these fish. So, it's our job to keep our corner of the world clean and healthy so that we're not affecting the outcome of the fish and the orcas that are, in the water that we're not like pouring it into the Sound, but we are actually doing that when we put pollutants into our landscapes. It's going to reduce soil life diversity too. So just in your own backyard, you can be killing off things that you aren't intending to kill off by applying pesticides to the lawn. Herbicides can kill insects even though they aren't targeting them. And then of course, the insecticides if used do. It can actually contribute to compacting your soil, which isn't healthy for your soil or your grass. It can increase the acidity of your soil, which isn't good for grass. It can increase thatch buildup, which also isn't good for grass. And then fertilizers in particular that are high nitrogen or high in phosphorus can actually contribute to algal growth in lakes and stiller waters that will reduce oxygen levels and kill fish and amphibious creatures. And all of this, of course, is seen downstream into Puget Sound. Next. If you have stuff sitting around that you aren't going to use, and maybe by the end of this talk, you might find that, you are leaning towards not using them. Hazardous waste disposal locations are around the area and open at different times for you to take those products to them and get rid of them so that they don't go into the landscape. And you can just check out King County Has Waste online. Next. So I want to talk about what a lawn is. Like I said, a lot of people think about these as things to walk across. We think about them like they're carpet. We don't think about the fact that there's soil underneath is habitat for all these microorganisms and macroorganisms and even some mammals and other critters. There are things living under there. It's a whole world of its own. Years ago, I was in Chicago where they have the Field Museum, which is a fabulous natural history museum. And they had an exhibit about prairie plants and soils that was simply this big canvas piece that had a chain on the side that you would pull on, and it would pull the canvas up. And when you first see it, it's just like echinacea and prairie plants growing, and they're very pretty. And you're like, oh, those are cool. And you start pulling on the chain and you pull and pull and pull, and all of a sudden you're seeing the root system of these plants. The root systems of the plants could be like 10 times as deep as the height of the plant, because the soils and the prairies in the Americas were so deep that these plants developed these amazing root systems. So thinking about that, grass also can appreciate, they can have a deep root system, and it's our job to create an environment where that can happen. Grasses that are used for lawns like to grow tall. Any of us who have not mowed our lawn in time will know that and see that. And there have been times where, I've had a lawn that I couldn't get to for one reason or another. And the grass starts to grow really tall. And then when it goes to flower, it will fall over when it starts to ripen, because that's the nature of what grass does. It falls to the ground and spreads its seeds. And then it's much harder to take care of. So we're trying to prevent that. So mowing regularly is important to keep the grass healthy and to keep it in that younger stage. You're really trying to delay maturation on grasses. It's kind of like if you've ever grown basil or even coleus. These are plants that try to go to flower and seed very quickly, and you have to keep pinching the flowers out of them to keep them alive. So think about it in that way, that you're trying to keep the grass young and healthy. When they are healthy, they're great competition for weeds. So, and they are going to be less likely to have disease issues. Lawns can be very permeable if they're healthy. They will be quite the opposite if they're not. If you have compacted soil, if you have a lot of thatch, water won't run through them. But they're also needy. So they need to be fed and they need to have water to keep them healthy. And we're going to talk about ways to do that. So next. These are the lawn care basics we're going to go through. What does a lawn need for light, drainage, watering, mowing, nutrition, and then pest, weed, and disease management. Next picture. So lawns need at least 6 to 8 hours daily. You can get away with 6, and that doesn't have to be consistent all day long, but it does mean that the whole area that is in grass needs to get that that light on it for 6 hours. So if you have a lawn that a portion of it gets 6 to 8 hours daily, but there's always this little area that may only get 2 hours, you might consider removing that area. That's never going to do as well as the part that you have with 6 to 8 hours of sun. You want to check for variations in exposure like that. So, watch your lawn through the season, take a look at different times of year, where the sun is, what it's doing. And we're talking about 6 to 8 hours daily, mostly through the growing season, recognizing that in the winter we don't get as much light, but grass likes to be in cool weather, in cool seasons, and it's not in complete dormancy. It actually is dormant in the summer when it turns brown if you stop watering it, but it slows down and it can be in sort of a stasis. If you have a lot of moss in your lawn, you're going to see what you see in that picture up above. And moss is one of those things that is there because the ground is compact, it's acidic, there's maybe a water layer. Moss is a primitive plant, and the way it reproduces is by its sexual parts moving through the water to meet each other, and they have to have standing water in order to swim. They're flagellated, so they sort of swim to each other. And if that water is not present, then the moss can't be successful. So good drainage matters to keep moss at bay. And it may be too shady, so you may need to consider what's going on there. Next. So this is just an image of grasses growing with some good healthy root systems. You need at least 8 inches of good soil, and this is where that matters with new construction, that they have to bring topsoil back in again. 12 inches is optimal to get a really good healthy lawn. So if you can do that, that's going to help you a lot. That may mean you need to amend the base soil that you have already in your lawn. You may need to bring in new soil to add to it to get that depth. Non-compacted sandy loam soil is the ideal that you're working towards to try to get the best drainage that you can. Sometimes you can't change the subsoil. Some people have hard pan underneath, and that may mean that you have a sharp horizon where pooling of water can happen, but you can adjust your watering schedule. That might not be the worst thing in the world. It could be a little bit of a reservoir under the lawn that you don't have to water maybe as often, because the water might pool and then pull the water might wick up through the soil. It could also be that water stands too much in that soil, and you could lose roots that drown out. So if you have an area like that, you just need to be aware so you can manage it properly. Next. So there are ways to improve their drainage in your lawn. You can aerate, and we had that question in the poll. So you can do it annually or every 2 years. Every 2 years is usually good enough. If you find that you need to be doing it more often, it may be you need to help improve your soil so that it's not as compacted as it would be. And adding compost to the soil actually will help to break it up so that it isn't so compacted, even without having to dig or till it in or do anything. Just top dressing will actually physically change the structure of your soil. A lot of what happens is microorganisms, macroorganisms will pull that compost into the soil, and especially if you put it on after you aerate, because if you do that, then you're actually getting it down into lower soil levels, but they actually move it around for you. And their movement in the soil also builds pore space. When you are aerating, if you're using a handheld tool, don't use like a garden fork like you see in this gentleman's boot and picture over on the left. That's actually compacting the areas that you're poking holes in. You want to use a hollow core aerator where you're pulling the plugs up out of the lawn, and then you leave the plugs on the lawn to decompose. You can use power aerators that you can rent. You'll see some pictures at the end of us like stripping sod from areas, and they are big machines as well. So sod cutters that are gasoline driven and aerators that are gasoline driven are heavy pieces of equipment that require some wrangling. If you have a flat lawn, it's much easier to use than if you have a slip lawn, which you might want to hire out for instead to have somebody do the aeration for you. But it's important to leave those plugs on the lawn. It looks messy for a while, but that actually is disintegrating and feeding the soil again. So next picture. You may find that you get a thatch layer buildup, and thatch is normal. This is just a process, normal process for how grass grows. When it becomes a problem is when it's accumulating faster than it's decomposing. So it's part of, you know, the decomposition process of how grass grows and being cut, and grass that falls into the lawn. It's not coming from when if you grass cycle, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's coming from the base of the plant and weed material that might be at the base of plants in the lawn. So if it's over 1/2 inch, it could block water and decrease the benefits of grass clippings or fertilizer, because those clippings and fertilizer are not reaching the soil surface. So you want to dethatch only if you need to, and ideally do it in the seasons only right before when grass is going to grow really well. Spring works really well, early spring, because then you can overseed and top dress and get your grass growing really, really healthy again. Oops. So cool season grasses don't build thatches quickly. So that's to our benefit. In the Northwest, we use cool season grasses. So it's not a huge problem here. It can happen, something to be aware of. There are both power equipment and handheld tools you can use. Power thatching, again, is another heavy machine, which kind of jostles you around. You can hire companies to do that. But then there's these handheld rakes. A fan rake, a fan leaf rake, the metal one, can also help to pull some of that out. And sometimes what you're finding you're pulling out is moss. And so that's another issue that we already talked about. But moss and thatch both can come out with these thatch rakes. Next. So to have a lawn be healthy and have good drainage, I talked about the fact that you can put compost over the top, and that by itself will start to get into the soil and help to break up your soil. You want to overseed when your grass looks thinner in spots. Sometimes these are just spot applications. Sometimes you're doing your whole lawn, but it's helpful. And it depends on what your lawn is composed of. And we'll talk about seed types in a minute. But basically, this is a great thing to do in the fall or in the spring. You want to do it in grass growing season. You can do one or the other, or both together. You can also fertilize at the same time. So the order of operations then would be, and let's look at the next slide. First, you're going to pick up any debris that's on the lawn. You have a dog, get their dog toys out of the way, sticks that the dog's been carrying around, or your children, their toys. Are there any rocks in the lawn? Anything that could get in the way of you using equipment or using your tools. Then you're going to rough up the soil with a rake. You could also use like a big stiff broom. I like to use rakes because I think they do a better job and they aren't as hard on your back. You can apply seed. You can use a mechanical spreader for large areas, and that could be, they don't have to be powered. They're just little push tools that you put the grass in and the grass drops down out of the feeder. Or you can have a handheld one like we saw in the picture a slide or two before, where you just hold it and you spin it. You turn the handle and it spins out and the grass goes across. You want to be able to, if you're doing that, you want to make sure you're overlapping and spreading it evenly. You can also apply by hand in small areas. So if you just have some spot areas that you're trying to do, you can just do it by hand, like you're throwing at chicken feed. Follow whatever the application rate is on the seed bag. They have suggested rates per square foot for the type of grass that you're using. You can always put out extra seed from what they say. I usually try to compensate for birds, wind, and drying out to add a little extra seed, because the birds will find the seed. Even if you're covering it with compost, they still tend to find some of it. Then you're going to put compost over the top, about 1/4 inch. And I spread it usually with the back of a fan-shaped leaf rake, a metal rake. So I flip it over and I kind of like move it back and forth across the lawn. I find if I use the tines the way you do when you rake leaves, that you move too much of the seed around. So I try to do this to not disturb it very much. And then you also water daily to keep that seed bed moist. These are tiny seeds. They're right under the surface of the soil, right under the surface of that compost you spread, and they can dry out very fast. So keep an eye on it. You'll know when it starts to fill in and knit in. You're going to see less spaces between everything. It's going to be more unified and complete, and you know that you don't need to water it quite as much. And also, if you're doing this in the fall, the rains will start and you don't have to worry quite as much about it. The other thing is, if you're going to use fertilizer, you would, at the step where you would use the fertilizer would be at the point where you're putting the seed down. So you put it down together. And you can get fertilizers that are formulated for new lawn for seeding as well. Next step. So now we're going to talk about watering a lawn. If you're trying to keep your lawn green through the summer, you need to water 1 inch per week to about a 6-inch depth into the soil. If it can go deeper, great. If you have lawn roots that are going 8 to 12 inches, then you want to get it deeper, but at least 6 inches. You can use a tuna can to test that. So you put them out across the lawn. If you have an automatic irrigation system, you turn that on, you spread these tuna cans out, and then you time how long it takes to accumulate 1 inch of water. A tuna can is used because it's about 1 inch tall. So you can just say, when the tuna can fills, that's how long it takes to get 1 inch of water out onto my lawn. You can cut a test strip to see if water's penetrating. And then you're going to choose the watering system that will work best for you and your lawn, depending on, you know, how much it costs, how much time it takes to use and apply, and the kind of area that you're trying to irrigate. Next. So if you have an automatic irrigation system, which many people do, these are in-ground systems. They're built in. Usually they have pop-up sprinklers so that people aren't tripping over them, and so you can mow. They'll drop back down when they're not in operation. You mow directly over the top of them. Some of them are stationary. Some can be oscillating. You can see that in these two pictures. They have different degree of spray patterns. So this is a half head that you're looking at that's along the edge of a curb. That could be 360, it could be 90 and just be a corner. So it depends on where you're trying to reach. You use these, and you know, professionals design these so that they will overlap, because as you get further away, the water spray is finer, and you need overlap in those areas to get the density spray that you need. You need to keep these clear of grass. There are tools, which actually I forgot to put on our tool picture later, we'll see. But there is a tool that actually is this hollow metal blade on a long handle that you put right over the head and you step on, and that cuts the grass around it, and you just pull the grass out. And that keeps those heads clear so that they don't get grown over with grass, especially in areas where the pop-ups, sometimes they're not pop-ups, sometimes they're in the ground and just spray up. And it's important to keep those clear. It's also important to time your watering. So if you are trying to water a lawn that needs a long period to water to get that inch, then you would want to have, and this is especially easy to do if you have timers and automatic irrigation systems, you want to do it so you spray water for maybe 5 minutes, and then you go on to the next station. And often timers, like, you know, auto systems like this have stations, so you're not watering your whole lawn at once. You might have a front and back lawn, you might have side part of your house. You would turn your irrigation system on to water 5 minutes on one station, then go on to the next, then go on to the next, then come back to the first one and water 20 minutes or whatever it takes, and then go on through the stations again. And what that does is get the soil wet and prevent it from being hydrophobic, so that the water that you actually are doing for that 20 minutes spraying out is going to penetrate properly. So you also want to take keep in mind wind and evaporation. So early in the morning is a good time to water. We'll talk about that in a minute too. Next. Manual irrigation is what many of us do, and there are many, many tools. As you can see in this picture, here's 3 different kinds of sprinklers. You know, you're going to pick your sprinkler depending on your lawn shape and size, your budget. Those little what they call rose sprinklers, the one in the middle, those they have different patterns. They can be rectangular, they can be square, they can be round, and they will spray out, you know, a pattern. The height of the spray will depend on how high you turn the water on, the water pressure in your system and your hose. And you have to move them around. And again, you have to keep in mind that overlap that you're trying to achieve. So you have to hand move the sprinkler, provide that overlap. And then the rocking sprinklers are nice because you can set those to just do a half side of the sprinkler and you don't have to have it come back the other way. So you can put it up against the building and have it spray out over the lawn, whatever works to get your pattern. And then the top one is an oscillator, so it's going to be flipping around water and spraying it in a lot of directions. And that's good where you have a really big lawn, as is the rocker in the bottom picture. And again, keep in mind, wind evaporation will affect these for any kind of, you know, sprinklers that we're sprinkling overhead, which is generally how we water a lawn. Wind will affect where the pattern goes. It will also speed evaporation, and then hot days will matter. So timing is important. Sprinklers can be really fun for kids. So if you have children, they can play in the sprinkler while you're watering your lawn. Next. So early morning's ideal. There's less wind, so there's less drift. There's less evaporation because it's cooler. It gives time for the grass to dry off, which wet grass for too long a period of time, especially if it's cool or going into the evening, would be setting you up for perhaps some disease issues. So you want to avoid that. It gives the grass also time to get hydrated well for the hot part of the day. And then there's less conflict with use of the lawn. So this little dog, of course, is helping to water here, but you may not, you know, your dog might not be out there trying to interrupt what you're trying to get done. Next. So there's lots of kinds of cool timers, smart timers, all kinds you can operate from computers, from your phone. These are just two examples. There's lots of companies who make these, lots of different features. You can have multiple stations for in-ground systems. You can have the multiple cycles I was talking about, doing a short followed by longer watering time. You can also have simple clocks that you can add to a manual system that's just, you know, your timed watering of the lawn with a hose and sprinkler, but you need to install backflow preventers on those to make sure that the water isn't going to double back into your plumbing. So lots of different tools. Some of them have, many of them now have these sensors that tell when it's raining, when the humidity is high, what time of year it is, and how hot it is, and it adjusts automatically once you have it programmed properly. So a lot of great tools to save you time and take good care of your lawn without having to worry about it. And of course, this helps if you are on vacation. You don't have to have somebody come over and water for you. So next, mowing the lawn. So of course, here's a lot of the work of the lawn that goes on through the year that we are most aware of, because we have to think about, oh, I have to go mow the lawn. Ideally, you want to mow your lawn frequently enough to keep it from getting too tall, but only enough so that you're not mowing it too short either. So optimum 2 to 3 inches. That will help to outcompete weeds, shade the soil. It helps to keep water in the ground, and the grass will be healthier. So you want to keep your mowing height up so that when you're mowing it back to 2 to 3 inches, and that's it. And then the next time you mow, you know, you let it get a little taller again, and then you bring it back down. Ideally, letting your clippings fall back into the lawn is the best way to feed it. These are full of nitrogen, which is essential for lawns. Grass is monocot. It's full of, it has no woody parts. It's full of just these green leaves that are full of nitrogen. They're full of chlorophyll cells, and you know, they need nitrogen to exist. And so if you let your clippings fall back, you don't need to fertilize as often. There's lots of different types of mowers. Electric hand push reel and the small gas powered. So use what's best for your site. I know some people have bigger properties where they may need to use like riding mowers. Again, you know, there's lots of new technology. There are grass cycling mowers in all kinds of forms. Just take a look and see what's out there and works for your site. And I wanted to point out the little graphic I have at the top. So as mowing height decreases, the depth of your rooting decreases and maintenance increases. And what they mean by that is, again, you know, the more grass blade there is, the more it can support the roots in the soil, because these are intertwined. They're not, you know, separate entities. And it doesn't need a deep root system if the grass is super short, but then that also makes it more vulnerable. A deeper root system on your lawn is going to make a healthier, more stress resistant lawn. Next. So when you're fertilizing, we recommend that you use natural, slow release, organic based lawn fertilizers instead of chemical fertilizers. And this goes back to feeding your soil. You're looking for things in the fertilizer that include alfalfa meal, feather meal, etc. So there's all kinds of names that you're going to recognize as being something you know is familiar to you, and you would understand where it came from. They're not chemical names. If you're using chemical fertilizers, they feed the plant directly. They're also very mobile, especially the nitrogen, and that washes out very fast. You want slow release so that it's only, you know, being consumed by the organisms in the soil and then fed back to the grass. In Washington State, we do not allow phosphorus in lawn fertilizers unless your soil tests can show that you have a depletion of phosphorus to protect waterways. It's also used in, can be used in new lawn fertilizers. So if you're seeding a lawn, that is allowed. But this is also, like nitrogen, one of those elements that can get into waterways and cause those algal blooms. So we're trying to prevent that. Grass cycling reduces your need to fertilize to 1 time a year, and application in the fall would be then the ideal time to do that. You can test your soil, as I said, to assess your nutrition needs. That's always a good idea, especially if you haven't done it before, to get a baseline, to know where you are, and then start your lawn, you know, fertilizing campaign, and then in the next year do it again and see how your soil has changed. Lime is added to lower the acidity of the soil because lawns prefer more alkaline soil. So it's good to add lime if you need it, and we're going to talk about that next. So next slide. Oh, fertilizers. So I just want to show you an example of what we're looking at. These are the fertilizers that you see in that Dr. Earth package that I showed you. Uses feather meal and alfalfa meal as the nitrogen sources. And this is what they look like. They smell like organic things. They smell fresh, clean. They actually have a good smell. These are things that are going to be feeding. It's like putting these mini composting products on your lawn to feed the critters in the soil. So 2 to 3 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet of lawn 1 time a year for grass cycle lawn is the recommendation in the Northwest. Applying in the fall, which nourishes the soil. This can help your roots grow, and you want to get it done by mid-October when the roots are still actively growing. Set a good root system that will hold it through the winter and then be ready in the spring to start growing again. Compost can supply nutrients, so just that application of putting compost on can help to add nutrients to the soil. I would avoid putting organic matter on top of the soil in the summer, because these are the kinds of things that can dry out, and then the top of the soil becomes crusty and hydrophobic and the water can't get through. So next. So here's our lime slide. So lime is supplying calcium. That's what we're trying to get into the lawn. Calcium disappears in Northwest soils because of all our heavy rain in the winter time. So what happens to it is it washes into lower levels below where the roots are, and then the plants can't access it. So there are 2 kinds of lime that you'll see, and if you do a soil test, you may get a recommendation for one or the other. Agricultural lime is just the calcium, and then the dolomitic lime has magnesium in it as well. And usually our soils have enough magnesium, so the calcium is really what's most commonly used, but you may get a soil test where they recommend the other. It will tell you how much you need to adjust pH. So you may buy a bag of lime that says put this much on, but your soil test will tell you more accurately, you only need half as much because your soil isn't really that acidic. So that can help you determine. The King Conservation District offers free soil tests to residents in King County. And you send in, you can have 5 soil samples per lifetime of an address. So you could do like a soil test this year for your lawn, and then one next year, and then you could wait a few years and try one again, and you would still have a couple more. Or you could, you know, do them for different parts of your yard. You have a vegetable garden and a shrub bed and a lawn, just to get baselines. Just go to their website and they have great information. They send you info back about how to read your soil test. You can call the garden hotline and go over the test as well with us, and we can help with that. So when you aerate, that's a great time. So if you aerate in the fall, that's a great time to put lime down, because it'll go into the holes and help get it in deeper than just on the surface. Lime can actually increase earthworm populations, and it can help improve your soil structure, which is important for a lawn. So next. I wanted to point out that sometimes you'll see products that say they're organic, and some things that say have a symbol on them. So certified organic is actually something that's been evaluated. Usually products, sometimes, you know, it's food and other things, that's kind of a different system. But for products for garden use, usually the Organics Material Review Institute evaluates things. They're a nonprofit. They certify products based on the USDA organic standards. And so you can find products in the store that will have the symbol on it. That lets you know it's been tested, and then it meets those standards. It's going to have fewer chemicals and things that you might not want to have to use. Organic by itself is just a term. It's unregulated in the industry. When you put it on a product, it just means that it's a carbon-based material. But when we're looking for lawn fertilizers, we want to look for the word organic, because we want to see that it's made from organic materials. So that's kind of the difference between that. You can get a natural slow release organic fertilizer that isn't certified, and you can get one that is. So your choice on that. Products can be sustainable, good for the environment, even if they're not certified. People are using sustainable practices, and some people choose not to certify a product, but it still still could meet the standards that might matter to you. Next. So if you want to renovate the lawn, you're going to follow the same steps that we went over for aerating and dethatching, top dressing, and overseeding the lawn. This is the same process. You may be doing the whole lawn. You might be doing only patches where you need to. You might be and sometimes needing to just remove weeds that are really colonizing in one area. And sometimes it requires a full lawn replacement. You'll think that, oh gosh, I'm just going to renovate, and what it really means is that you're replacing the entire lawn. So next. So if we're going to replace the lawn, there's a couple ways to do it. You're going to use a sod lawn, which could be a faster finish lawn. There could be higher costs involved. The rolls of sod are heavy to work with. I used to work for Seattle City Light as a gardener for about 10 years, many years ago. And we had a sod farm where we grew our own sod and cut it and replaced, especially parking strips where the crews would put the poles that they were waiting to put new poles up, and they would kill the lawn underneath, and we'd have to come in and replace all that sod. So I actually damaged my back doing that work, because I was moving sod that was too heavy for me to be picking up, that was very wet and very long. So if you're working with sod, take care of yourself. The lengths that they sell you are not as long as the ones we were cutting, but you can cut them into smaller pieces if you need to handle them. The soil profile on sod can differ from your soil. And so sometimes that's kind of a funny thing, because it needs to knit to the ground underneath and start growing together. Seed can take weeks to fill in. It could be spotty depending on how well you spread it. The weed pressure could be higher, but it's much easier. Seed, a packet of seed is much lighter to carry around and to put into a spreader than rolling sod out. It can be less expensive, but grass seed also isn't cheap. And you need to water it daily, just like if you're overseeding, until it all fills in. So next. So if you're installing a seed lawn, you're going to go through those same sort of steps that we talked about for top dressing and overseeding. You're going to clear the area of any plant material. You're going to add fresh topsoil to the area or compost. You're going to level it. So it's important to level and to think about where the water's moving. If you have lawn that's near a house, you might want to slope the lawn slightly away from the house edge so the water will run away from the foundation of your home. So just think about where the water is going to move and how you can have slight slopes on your lawn just to move water. You apply the seed with a mechanical spreader. This is a better idea than trying to do this by hand because you're going to get a better spread. But even here in this picture, you can see that there are patches where the grass didn't come up as well. You can go back over it as it starts to grow. After a week or so, you can go back over and add to those areas to make it more dense. There's higher weed pressures when you do this. You can see some of the weeds coming up in here. And then apply that extra seed. This is really important where you're doing this, and compost over the top to about a 1/4 inch. I use the back of the fan-shaped leaf rake, like I mentioned. You're going to water daily. Now, what you need to know is that if you're going to redo this area and your lawn wasn't doing well, you do need to assess your soil before you start to do anything on both doing a seed lawn and a sod lawn, because you need to make sure that you're not going to go to all this work and then it's still not going to work very well. So assess what's going on. Is your lawn draining? You could actually dig, drainage a hole. You could dig holes, test holes, and put water in there and see how long it takes to drain out and kind of figure out whether it's draining too fast or too slow. And then maybe you might need to amend the whole area, maybe even till some compost into an area to prepare it for your new lawn to repair or replace the issue. Next. So a sod lawn, you go through the same steps, but then you roll out the sod, and you're going to stagger your seams where you're laying it. So those short edges need to not be right next to each other, ideally, so that there aren't a whole bunch of long edges. You can't get away from the long edges from the long edges of the sod, but you can do that on the short edges. So it's like patchwork. You're going to apply this, you're going to lay this down so that they're staggered and they will not have as many open seams. You can cut pieces to fit with a handheld half-inch edger, or you can use sod knives, which are easy to use. That will cut through the sod. Often there's a plastic layer on the bottom of sod pieces. Not all sod comes like that. If you can avoid that, I would, because years later, you may have grass that you need to remove and you still have to get that plastic out of there. I use a pitchfork to knit the edges together. So if I'm laying sod end to end, I will lift one edge up and then drop it. And that will allow it to sort of hit the other edge of the sod that's already laid down and knits it together better. The closer those are to each other, the faster they're gonna start to grow together. You put some seed in all those edges, and then you put some topsoil or compost in all those edges to also help to seal them. And then you can water daily for the first week. Left a word out. Next. So the types of seed matter, what we grow in the Northwest. You're going to look for a seed mix that's perennial rye and fescue predominantly. Sometimes they might have a little bit of Kentucky bluegrass, which is added because it's really fast to establish, but it doesn't survive in the western part of Washington. So it'll look good for a while, but then it fades out, and then you may have gaps. So if you can find a mix that doesn't have anything in it, great. If you do have Kentucky bluegrass, then just know that you might want a little bit extra so that you can apply more seed as you need to if you see some gaps. Most mixes contain several varieties, each type of perennial rye or fescue. It's not usually just one fescue variety and one rye, or sometimes you'll find a single rye blend that's like 3 different kinds of rye grass. Sod choices often can be single types of grass. They may be all perennial rye or all fescue. Next. And here's kind of the little summary of what they look like. The Kentucky bluegrass at the bottom, you can see why people like that. It's a deep green. It's used as a filler. But it's not the greatest grass for here. It's vulnerable to heat and drought and stress. It's high maintenance in the long run. It has, because it's deep green, it needs a lot of feeding. It has limited shade tolerance and doesn't persist. So we're looking at the top two grasses are usually the combination. Fescue is a finer blade. Rye has the little bit thicker blade. They both are pretty good on traffic, but fescue is more tolerant to foot traffic. And perennial rye is very disease resistant usually. Fescues are more drought resistant, tolerant, I should say. Next. So I'm going to throw clover in the mix. I know a lot of people spend a lot of time and money trying to get clover out of their lawn. Clover used to be included in lawn seed on purpose because it provides nitrogen for the lawn. It's a nitrogen fixing plant in the pea family that has nodules, specialized nodules on the roots that actually can help trap atmospheric nitrogen, and it kind of leaks out into the soil around the plants. And especially if it's being mowed and disturbed, you are, you're triggering that to happen. So clover also can play nice with grass, so you can get it to blend in evenly where you have a lawn that still looks very green. It does stay green even in drought conditions. And the flowers that actually bloom on this, even when you cut it low, it will continue to bloom, are great for bees. They're good bee food. Clover can help lawns knit together because it has rhizomatic stems under the surface of the soil that will grow throughout the soil. And it helps to just keep the lawn healthy and whole. Next. So we're only going to look at a few examples of disease and pest issues. We don't have a huge problem with diseases in the Northwest. This is one of the most prevalent, red thread, and this is a close-up picture of it. It's a fungal disease that is seen usually in the fall. Moisture and humidity exacerbate it. If your lawn is stressed through the summer and then comes into the fall and it's very moist, we see a lot of like rain starting to happen, but it's still warm temperatures. And so there's a lot of humidity. It gets kind of muggy. That's the kind of conditions that will make this grow. It doesn't kill the lawn. It's just cosmetic damage. It has this spread fungal growth that looks really weird. But you can manage it actually adding nitrogen. So you could take like some lawn fertilizer, you put that on in the fall, and that's going to actually help the situation. So that's something you should be doing anyway. If you keep your lawn hydrated well during the summer with that 1 inch of water a week, that's going to help prevent it as well. So next. This is the big one that we hear the most about. So I included moles as one of the lawn pests because molehills drive people crazy. There's very few tactics to dealing with this. Everybody has their own, I'm sure you guys do. And basically you're managing a mammal. Mammals are the hardest thing to manage in a garden. People worry a lot about insects, but mammals do a lot of damage and they're hard kind of pests to deal with. Moles are subterranean. They excavate tunnels for their living quarters and they are looking for soil insects. So the fact that they're eating soil insects, means that, your soil is alive because there are things in there. And so they're not eating just bad bugs. They're eating things like worms and, things that are good for the soil. They can move into different levels depending on where the soil moisture is. So sometimes this is a seasonal problem. There'll be molehills for a while and then they'll stop. They'll disappear. There are beneficial aspects actually to this. They do mix soil underneath your lawn. They help aerate. They eat slug and then they eat crane fly larvae, and slugs are pests in the garden in general, and crane fly larvae can be terrible for the lawn. So they can actually be your friend. They are difficult to manage. The Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife has different species sheets that you should access to look at what they call you know, animals that have bad negative interactions with human beings. So these would be things like rats and moles and mountain beaver and all kinds of things. So you can trap them. It's legal, but read the rules on that. You can tolerate this, knowing that it might be seasonal. You know, this is an extensive mole family in this picture that we're looking at. There are ways to deter them. Some of them work well, some of them don't. There's lots of products you can try. Some people use sound. What I found works for me, and I've always had small lawns, so, you know, I can't speak for people with larger lawns who, you know, see more damage, is to flatten the hills and then find where you can see depressions sometimes between these molehills and fill those with soil on top of this sod. And sometimes that can deter them and they'll move off into other areas. Sometimes what I've managed to do is move them more into shrub beds where I don't mind. They're, you know, unless I have little young plants that they're disturbing. If it's grown shrubs, I don't care if they're making molehills in the shrub bed, it doesn't matter. But this is a big one. It's something we're happy to talk to you about more and, you know, help you sort of craft solutions for. Next. Crane flies. So crane fly are these large flying insects that you start seeing usually in the late summer, fall. They are not mosquitoes. People think they're giant mosquitoes. They are not. They don't hurt you. They're peaceful. But it's the larvae that do all the damage. And the picture above is an example of how the lawn looks when you have crane fly damage. They feed on decaying matter in the soil and the roots of the grass. And so they kill grass off sort of in this patchy pattern, like here and there. It's not all the whole thing. Lawns can recover from damage. So, you know, tolerance is the best thing if you don't have too many, but you could find out how many you have. You sample to treat them, to decide if you need to treat. And this link that I put here is a great link to show you their life cycle. So when the adults are present, when the larvae are present, when they're pupating. And it's from WSU at Whatcom County. It's a really great little graphic. So I advise you to check that out. Next. So here's how you sample for them. And this is all recommendations from WSU. So check for 4 areas that are affected in your lawn, and then measure a 6-inch by 6-inch square. You can do this 10 by 10 and then not do the math. But basically you're cutting edges on 3 sides with a sod knife. And I don't flip it over entirely like that. I usually just lift it up because then I can flip it back down again and it'll seam together better than flipping it upside down like this, taking the whole piece out. But either way, you're basically looking at the square to count how many crane fly larvae you have. Another name for these guys are leather jackets because they have this tough skin, and this is what they look like. It's what you're looking for. February, March are optimal times. You could still do this right now. You want to find these guys and count them before they start hatching out later in May, because they pupate in May and then become adults, come out in June. So if you only have like 0 to 25 per square foot, and you're going to do the math that it says here, multiplied by 4 to determine the number present in a square foot, you don't need to do anything, just fertilize appropriately. And we're going to talk in a second about what else to do. 25 to 50, this is sort of a custom call on your part. You really don't need to do anything if the lawn is healthy. If it's not, you may need to think about what to do. And if you have more than that, then you have a big infestation and you have to think about why is this happening and change your practices. Next. So prevention is the best method to dealing with crane fly. You want to do all the things that we just talked about. We'll regularly keep the thatch down, aerate, grass cycle, let the lawn go dormant. And this is something that's going to come up again in a minute when we talk about another pest. So letting the lawn go dormant, these are semi-aquatic creatures. The more water in the ground, the more habitat you're creating for these larvae. So you don't want it to be too watered over the summer. You want to water deeply though to encourage a deep root system so that the grass can tolerate that damage. Encourage birds. So I count this as treatment because they are actually coming in and eating insects from your lawn. Of course, this is a worm, but I tried to look for good pictures of birds with crane fly larvae and I did not find any, but they do eat them. If you all of a sudden see a bunch of crows, a bunch of starlings, a bunch of robins in your lawn, usually that means that there's something under there. Raccoons will often dig this sod up if there's lots of larvae under the soil. And encourage black beetles. So you can do that by having plantings around the edges of your lawn that have like native grasses and different mulch, like leafy mulches or wood chips, where black beetles like to hide and live, and they will come out into the lawn and help to eat these grubs because they will be in the soil a bit. You can apply predatory nematodes, which you can purchase. They are usually mixtures of nematodes. You have to time the presence of the nematode with the larva in the soil, with proper soil temperatures and the correct species of nematode. So if you don't have all those things combined at the right time, it won't do much good. Proper soil temperature is usually around 60 degrees. And so it's a fine line for us to get nematodes applied in the spring when the larvae are still in the soil, because the soils don't start to get that warm until when they're about to start pupating. So, you know, it's worth a try, maybe late in April, early May, to try and do that, and you could catch some of them. Next. So this is a newer pest, the European chafer. It's another type of beetle. It does the same thing, feeds on grass roots in the soil. It's just new to the Northwest since like 2015 down in Tukwila or in SeaTac area, and has started to move into other areas. It's, you know, seen it in Tukwila and Southeast Seattle. Hydrated lawns are more resistant. And this is why I wanted to bring this up, that if you're trying to treat crane fly larvae, you want to let your lawn go more dormant, but it's better for dealing with European chafer to actually have a hydrated lawn. So there's, you know, a fine line. Hopefully you have one and not the other, or none of them at all. But if you have anything, you should make sure you identify what's there so you know what your proper course of action would be. These guys are active in fall and spring, and they pupate in May, and the adults come out in June. They also are subject to birds. So birds, again, having birds in your garden is a good thing. They will help. They do want you to report sightings of them so they can track them and see where they're moving to. The picture on the top is a good descriptive picture of what the grubs look like when you find them. And then the Seattle Times article is a newish article about their presence and their effect and what's happening with them. So next. Lots of weeds in the lawn. So we're not going to go through every single weed, but I will point out what they are and the slight differences in how they affect your lawn. Weeds can outcompete your lawn if the lawn is not healthy. And certain weeds are really good at that. So keep your lawn healthy, do all the things we've been talking about. Basically consider that your grass is a collection of plants. It's your, you know, lawn grass collection that you have in your garden. You know, you might be a hosta collector, but if you're growing a lawn, you're a lawn grass collector. So you want to mow high, that helps to shade out the weed seedlings. Don't let them go to seed. Do all these aerating, dethatching, top dressing, improve the soil conditions. Many weeds actually like compacted soils. They're colonizers. So if you're improving your soil, your grass is going to grow better and the weeds won't like it as much. Remove lawn from areas where it can't thrive and tolerate some weeds. So for instance, things like clover can add nitrogen to the lawn. And the weed on the left is cat's ear, which is one of my most disliked weeds for a lawn because it colonizes one plant over the top of the other. This is not dandelion. It's similar. It's in the same family, but has a different growth habit. So next, this is going to be a series of different types of things we see in the lawn. So dandelions are probably the number one enemy to people who have lawns. Just consider that dandelions, you can manage a lot of them by hand and just keep them at bay. Keep those seed heads off, don't let them spread. But they can also grow compatibly with the lawn if you like flowers in the lawn. So there's ways to grow both. Plantain can cause sort of big flat areas. It's good to remove them. Just so you know, this is a great healing herb. So what I do with them is I pull them early in the spring and use them and then reseed over those areas. And if I get a few more the next year, I do the same thing. Buttercup is one you definitely want to remove, but it's there because water conditions are too high and the soil is compact and it's acidic. So calcium, adding lime, adding aeration, getting that soil uncompacted will help. And moss we talked about, that's also compaction, shade, fertility, and acidity. Here's the cat's ear. Those need to be pulled. They also are there in compact soils. There's the clover again. And then there's things like prunella or self-heal, which can make these big patches in a lawn. You know, those are easier to get rid of. It's mostly a matter of, you know, just pulling them. Don't let them get to this size when you start to see them. You see these less often in a lawn situation, especially if the lawn is cut high enough. Sheep sorrel might come in from a weed, an edge, a weed in a bed. And these can colonize a lawn, so you want to prevent that from happening. So next. Daisies, I like daisies. I plant them on purpose in my lawn because they're compatible with the lawn, and in the summertime they just sort of get green and the flowers are gone and the grass just grows around them. I do the same with yarrow, and this is looking at a yarrow and as a lawn substitute in this image, but you can add yarrow to the lawn. It tolerates mowing. It will just knit through the lawn like clover does, and it provides some flowers, grows slow. Ground ivy is another one of those that's more of an aesthetic choice for you. Again, likes more compact areas. Sometimes we'll see annual bluegrass, which is it's a grass that's not perennial, and it will come in and colonize. So that just means your grass isn't thick enough and healthy enough that it's leaving gaps for these annual grasses to grow. Speedwell is a veronica, same thing, it kind of fills in spaces. And then these tall fescues, this grass that you see around it is growing too short. This tall fescue is taking advantage. You have to dig those out. You don't want them to seed. And you need to make sure that you're keeping your grass tall enough to keep the taller grass weeds from invading. Next. So tolerate weeds that can grow companionably. Use hand tools instead of herbicides to remove them. This is ideal right now, young, when they're small, when the soil is wet. If you have some areas that you have a lot of like cat's ear or plantain that you really like, it's not possible for you to dig it out, use some safer products to spray it. And I'm talking about things like oils made from herbs like rosemary oil, or just different herbicides that might kill some of these weeds. It'll kill the grass around it too. So you will have to reseed and replace that piece of lawn. Even if you pull things out, sometimes you'll have to do that because you've left a big dead patch underneath. The best weed management is to grow a healthy lawn that can outcompete these, and evaluating the conditions your lawn is growing in matters, because if it's too compact, certain things will grow. If it's too wet, keep your lawn happy. Next. So also, if you have a lawn that's perpetually in wet soil, don't grow a lawn there, replace it. Try to think about, native plants that can tolerate that. That's a good sunny area. You could actually plant blueberries there. If it's shady, you can think about things like evergreen huckleberry, and native plants that will tolerate that kind of situation. Red stem dog would do fine there. Don't try to grow lawn on a slope that has more than 12% grade. It's dangerous to mow, to aerate, to thatch, to walk on. Substitute that out with ground covers instead. And then think about where your shade is. Tree roots can impede a lawn. If there's a lot of needles that fall in that area, just convert those areas to different kinds of garden spaces. Next. And here's some of the ways you remove lawn. So you can use this half moon edger that you see in the middle picture and just turn it over. You can use sort of handheld sod cutters, or you can use a sod cutter that you rent. And as I said, these are pieces of equipment that are heavy, but basically it just cuts a swath through the lawn and then you roll it up and remove it. You can hire it out, but I wouldn't till it. As you can see in this don't do photo, tilling grass, it's going to be a big clumpy mess, and you're going to have grass continuing to try to grow. Because even when if you don't flip it completely over and smother it, it's not going to decompose. It's going to try to grow because it's a good strong grower. Next. This is just a picture of some of my cohorts at TILF many years ago, stripping out lawn for a garden area that we were putting in at McAuliffe Park in Kirkland. Next. This is another way to remove lawn, is to sheet mulch it and wait. You have to be patient, but it will decompose. So you put cardboard or newspaper. You can put mulch down. You can put soil down and then just start planting into the areas. It takes time, but it works, and everything decomposes underneath. Okay, next. So what do you do with all that sod? You can see behind my friends here, it got all flipped over, and so right behind the woman on the left, that became a barrier or a berm where we piled the sod, and then we covered that with some soil eventually, and it is still in the garden. It is lower than it used to be, but it became a planting bed. It's always good to keep it on site if you can. It's expensive to take to the transfer stations or the, to compost it. And you get a lot of material out of it. It's good to keep it on site. Okay, next. So here's some alternative. If you want to try different kinds of lawns, there's EcoTurf, which is shorter grasses, sometimes native to the area. They don't need to be mowed as often because they don't grow as tall. They have other things mixed into them. You can just buy native grasses and substitute. You can buy steppable plants. Some people do clover lawns entirely. I've seen clover beds put in under orchard areas. It's really healthy for the fruit trees. The creeping thyme you see in that right picture makes a beautiful, beautiful bed. It takes a long time to establish, certainly. So smaller lawn areas would be easier to do with this kind of floral and plant-based instead of the turf-based substitutes. Next. This is just an image of daisies in a lawn in the, in the Northwest. This is very commonly seen in parks. It's not bad for the lawn, and I want to just encourage people to think about it. Next. So tools, these are examples of some of the tools that I've been talking about. The half moon edger. This is a hori-hori knife, which is great for getting weeds out of a lawn, as is this puller up here that works by, you put the prongs over the center of the root or the head of the plant, and then you step on it and pull the handle back, and it pulls it out of the soil. This is a bow rake for moving soil around. So when you're leveling an area, there's the sod knife, there's a leaf rake that's metal tined. I wouldn't use the plastic ones. This is a hollow core handheld aerator, and then the thatch rake. All of these tools are, easy to find. I have all of these at my home, and I use them. I have a very small lawn, but they still come in very handy. Next. And this is a list of resources. So I think, Marisol, is this PowerPoint gonna go online for folks later?
Yes.
Okay. So you can come back and these are live links, except for that King County, I shrunk the lawn. We'll make that a live link. You can go in and read all these things for yourself. The first one, of course, is the Garden Hotline. Ecologically sound lawn care is a very very intensive book about lawn care in the Northwest. If you want to learn more, which was written by David McDonald, who worked with Seattle Public Utilities, and it's kind of the Bible for lawn care in the Northwest. Still written some years ago, but still accurate information. And then just a lot more places to find resources and to review this material. And that's all I got. I know it's a lot. I mean, the takeaways are, you know, treat your grass like it's alive. It's a collection of plants. Think about it that way. Specialize in that. Give it what it needs, and know what your particular problem areas might be, and then apply solutions to those. You're not going to have everything that you saw in here is going to be an issue for you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Laura. So now I'm gonna stop sharing screens for a second. Can switch over here. And we will actually go into questions. So, I mean, I don't need my screen for this, but it's a lovely picture as well. There we go. So I'm gonna look into the Q&A box. Looks like we don't have any questions at the moment, but that's okay. Feel free to type your questions now. Maybe something came up. Laura, wondering if there's maybe some kind of common questions that you get asked when you do these kinds of presentations, specifically about lawns, maybe some common misconceptions, or you always tend to get this particular question?
I think the questions we get most often are about moles and moss, probably. And then some about lawn weeds. That seems to be the other concern people have the most. You know, like I said, moles are one of the harder things to manage, and they are sort of, those need individualized advice. So I would recommend that if people have concerns about that they can call us at the hotline and we can talk you through, you know, some options and talk about how to deal with that. Moss is very common in the Northwest. So if you manage the things I mentioned, the compaction, the acidity, fertility of the soil, and make sure your soil drains well, you will have less issues with it. We don't encourage people to kill moss entirely. You can do things like, you know, put iron phosphate on the lawn to kill your moss, but then you have to rake it all out anyway. So it's really better to change the pH of the soil. You can put calcium on it to, that lime application will help with that. The other thing there is that, you know, moss is good for Northwest native birds. They use a lot of it in their bird nesting. A thing like, the Anna's hummingbirds that overwinter here, their nests are lichen, moss, and spider silk. That's what they make them from. So even if you have it in your lawn and you remove it, you remove parts of lawn where it's really prone to moss, you might still have it in your beds. But I would encourage people not to worry too much about it. It doesn't hurt anything, and it's actually great for our native fauna.
All right.